Good morning. I am Dr. Julie Lane, and welcome to Learning Challenges and Parent Grief. It's wonderful to be back with ACSI. Back in the day when we had face-to-face conferences, I spoke at multiple ACSI conferences throughout the state of California, including the early childhood conferences. And it's just exciting to be back and to be a part of the great work that all of you are doing with ACSI. I am an associate professor at Fresno Pacific University. FPU is a Mennonite university, and along with many of my colleagues, we come from different denominations and thoroughly enjoy the opportunity to learn from one another and explore God's Word. Prior to my position at the university, I served as a special education teacher and program director and school administrator for children with special needs. I did this in both public, private, charter, and virtual schools. 11 of those years I spent in Lutheran education, developing special education programs and being a consultant for Christian schools throughout the country and developing effective, responsive, and Christ-like special education programs. So I'm eager to share my knowledge with you today, and I hope you enjoy the content. What to expect today? We are going to dip our toe into 4 different topics: response to intervention, student study teams, child find, and the grief process. Each of these topics could be talked about for hours on end. So today we're just going to dip our toe into each of them. And of course, if you have further questions or want to explore anything further, you're always more than welcome to contact me. So let's start off with response to intervention. Response to intervention, or ITI, came about many, many decades ago. Its work was done in the 1970s, and it wasn't until 2004 that we found RTI in special education law. RTI is a pre-special education identification process in hopes of providing students with interventions that will keep them from being diagnosed with a special education disability. So RTI is a multi-tiered process. Traditionally, it's a 3-tier process. And sometimes I've seen school districts with as many as 6 or 7 steps within their process. So today I'm just going to share the 3-tier process, which is the traditional approach to response to intervention. The 4 core components of RTI is evidence-based classroom instruction, that we're working in our classrooms based on evidence-based practices that are best practices, and that the research shows that how we teach in the classroom is the most effective. It also includes student assessment with a classroom focus. What this means is, are we assessing our students based on the content that we're teaching them? And these assessments are often called criterion assessments. It's very similar to what we would see in a K-12 setting of a chapter test or a spelling test, things that are very specific to what we teach. So are you assessing your children in your classroom based on what you're teaching them? Colors, shapes, the alphabet, basic reading words, basic math facts. So assessing them on that content. We need to do universal screening of academics and behavior. What this means is that we're assessing everyone in the classroom on a consistent basis, not just the child who is struggling in the classroom. So universal screening is often seen at the beginning of the school year when children come back from their summer break, and we need to find out what did they remember and what did they forget over summer. And so we give a universal screening across our classroom. That is one way to universally assess how our children are doing. And then the 4th component of RTI is continuous progress monitoring of students. So not only do we do this universal screening at the start of the school year, but we continue to assess universally and individually for students who seem to be struggling throughout the school year. RTI also uses evidence-based interventions within our classrooms. So intervention is data from scientific, rigorous research designs that are effective, and interventions shown to improve the results of student progress and achievement. So are you using classroom tools that are both effective and research-based? There are 3 levels of support. Classroom, that's when you're working with most of your students, and maybe there's a very large group struggling a bit with a new concept you're teaching, and you need to work with a large group of students. The 3rd level of support for students on the RTI model is the small group. That's when you've taught and maybe even used a different intervention to teach a concept that a few students are still not getting. And so you work with those students in a small group. And then after you've done assessment again on that small group, if you still have 5 to 10% of your students struggling, then you're working one-on-one with them. We need to realize as educators that as we move into these 3 levels of support, it's imperative that we as the educator work with these groups. These groups shouldn't be assigned to the volunteer mom, the volunteer grandma, volunteer dad in the classroom. You are the expert. You have been given the gift to teach. So it's imperative when you're identifying students who are struggling that you are the one working with them, not the volunteer in the classroom. This is a very traditional model of response to intervention, RTI. And as you can see at the base in tier 1, this is really when we explore. We begin to do that universal exploring to identify students who are struggling in the classroom. In tier 2, we're very driven to come into that small group of 10 to 15% of your students who are still struggling with concepts. And then of course, tier 3 is that 5% of students that are still continuing to struggle. And we're thinking, well, maybe we need to refer them for an assessment. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. So if you wish, you can stop the video right now and read through the RTI pyramid and gain further insights to your own practices within your own school. So how do we screen students? We use tools that are reliable, valid, and demonstrate diagnostic accuracy. These tools could come out of a pre-published curriculum guide. However, you want to be very, very careful. Curriculum guides do not always have tools that have been normed or that have been researched to determine whether or not they're reliable or valid. So take some time to look into your curriculum tool and see if your tools are appropriate for your students. Also looking at race, ethnicity, English language learners, because not all tools are appropriate for those populations, because the tools have been normed on middle-class white America, and it hasn't taken into account English language learners or those who've not had the opportunity to receive an education to date. As shared and on the pyramid, first screening, universal screening, you're screening all your students, and you're identifying those who fall below the cutoff point. For those who don't pass that first screening, your small group, implement an evidence-based intervention. Use intense instruction for targeted areas that you feel that they're falling behind in. The duration, the frequency, the length of sessions, the intervention is conducted. Make sure it's conducted as instructed in the intervention guide that you're using. A child may need a longer period of time, therefore duration, to study that area. Longer sessions, maybe 10 minutes, 20 minutes. The frequency, are you doing it once a day, 3 times a day? The length of the sessions. Then monitor that small group and continue to look at who is grasping that concept and who is not. And you'll adjust your intensity and frequency as needed on each student's progress. For those who do not pass that second screening, implement an evidence-based intervention, another one. Try something else, because as you all know, we are unique children of God, and each one of us learns differently. We perceive the world differently. So maybe you need to try a different type of intervention tool. Again, duration, frequency, length of the sessions, and the intervention is conducted as instructed. And monitor that progress. And adjust intensity and frequency as needed. Use the data you collect as to whether or not your intervention tool is effective. So when you're working with these smaller groups, you should be collecting data on which child is grasping concepts and which one is not. Compare and contrast these interventions with core curriculum and see how you can work that intervention into the core curriculum, especially when it's working. In doing so, you may review the curriculum and decide, well, maybe we need to look at a different curriculum for the whole group, for our entire class. And for those who do not pass the third screening, then we're going to refer them to the student study team, which we'll talk about next. Or if you have a significant concern, you may even want to refer them for an evaluation. Before we leave this topic, I would like to talk about briefly interventions, remediation, modification, and accommodations. Oftentimes, educators use these words interchangeably, and they are not. They are for very, very different terms and mean for very different techniques. So intervention, we just got done talking about response to intervention. So this is when we bring in a tool, a teaching strategy to help a child learn a concept that they're not grasping in a traditional teaching approach. Remediation, that's when we're going back and reteaching the same way in hopes of having a different result. And sometimes we need to do remediation, especially after a long summer break. If a child's gone on vacation during the school year or they've been out sick, sometimes we have to go back and reteach, knowing that the child will grasp the content in just reteaching as we have before. Modifications. Modifying means we've changed the curriculum. We've changed the assignment. And this could be upwards or downwards. For children who are excelling, we modify their assignments to a higher level. For children who are struggling, maybe we're changing the assignment down to a level where they're currently achieving. Be careful with modifications though. When we When we modify a spelling list and give children fewer spelling words, we have modified it. When we're asking them to work on their basic sounds of letters, where the rest of the class is working on blending sounds, then we have changed the assignment. However, in subjects like math, if all of the students are doing basic single-digit addition problems and you give them 20 problems to do, but for one student, because maybe they have an attention concern, they're only doing 10 problems, but they're still doing single-digit addition. You haven't changed the assignment. You've just reduced the number of problems for them to do. That's not a modification, because you haven't changed the curriculum. What you've actually done for this child is give them an accommodation. Accommodations are tools that we give children to access the curriculum at the same level as their peers. So this could be extra time, reduction of an assignment, but at the same level in the curriculum. Different testing setting, books on tape, audiobooks, oral tests, calculators, and computers. Student study teams, what are they? A student study team is collaborative. It's a group of teachers coming together to help a colleague find a way to address a concern they have with a student. When you do student study teams, finding the time to do so is often hard, and I always recommend doing so before school, because after school, we all have places to go and things to do, and sometimes educators or parents come in and want to talk to us. Members, administrators, counselors, regular teachers, and special education teachers. And the purpose is to find ways for students to achieve to their full potential. You as a teacher can refer a child to the student study team in your school. You would need to have a referral form and documentation to support why you are referring that student. If you don't have these type of documents, feel free to contact me and I'm happy to send those over to you as examples. When you meet, these are typically the people that you would want to be part of your team to talk about where the child's struggling and how can you find an intervention, a modification, an accommodation to support that student. You want to define your main concern to the group. You want to have collected data so that you have baseline data and a goal for that student. Discuss what may have historically worked best, and then develop an intervention based on the RTI model to focus on. And with your little kiddos in your classrooms, I would pick maybe one at most of those concerns at a time. If you try to change too many things at once, the child will become very confused. You want to implement an intervention for 4 to 6 weeks, and you want to consult with your team or the leader of your team on a weekly basis. You want to observe, collect data, monitor the child's progress, and after 4 to 6 weeks, you might want to modify the intervention because maybe it's not working at all, or maybe it's almost working, but if you tweak it a little bit, that child will find more success. After 4 to 6 weeks, if the child no longer needs the intervention, then you can discontinue. If the child still hasn't made progress, you can go back and review that intervention. And if that initial intervention has worked, you can always pinpoint another area that you would like to address. and then repeat the process again for 4 to 6 weeks. Child find. Child find is what is defined under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And depending on the age groups you're working, Part B is ages 3 to 21 and Part C ages 0 to 3. And these hyperlinks should take you directly to where child find is discussed in the law. But what child find is a school district's responsibility to locate children who are suspected of having a learning or a special education disability qualification. The school district where your school resides is responsible for the child find process. Child find processes typically take place in the fall of every year, and your school district should be reaching out to you to ask you to participate in that process. If they are not, you can contact the special education department in your school district and ask them or request that you'd like to be part of the child find process each fall, and that you need assistance in understanding child find so that you can best serve your students who are struggling. This is a free service for both the family and for you. Child find efforts must be equal to those of the children in the government schools, and this is the assessment process. And a child who is assessed within the public sector counts as part of the child find activity. If you're referring your children to private school psychologists or educational specialists, then they don't count as part of child find. You can have parents request an assessment from the public schools free of charge. This is often done very readily with younger children. We find more struggles in having children in K-12 being assessed, but for our little guys, we seem to be able to get them assessed fairly early because of the emphasis on early intervention. The parent needs to submit the request to the school district special education department in writing and includes the following documents. Under federal law, once the parent submits their letter, the district has a maximum of 15 days to respond. And if the district agrees to do testing, the district has a maximum of 60 days to complete the testing. These two timelines are federal timelines. Many states have shorter timelines. So you'll need to check with your state department's special education division to see how quickly your states must respond. Please note that these are 15 days and 60 days. These are not 15 school days or 60 school days. It's days, counting weekends and holidays. So please do check with your state. You should attend any meeting, but don't be an advocate, because otherwise you will become adversarial to the district. You want to be there to support the parent and to ask questions for your own knowledge and clarification and how to meet the needs of the child. If you're working with the younger population, IFSPs, the Individualized Family Service Plan, is for 0 to 3-year-olds. It may be extended to age 5, and it is family-centered. So it's about providing the family with supports to meet the needs of the child with special needs. If you're working with children who are 3 to 5, then the Individualized Education Plan, which is student-centered with very specific individualized goals and objectives to meet the needs of the child. You may or may not be able to implement these plans in your school site, and being open and honest with parents as to what you can and cannot do will be in the best interest of the child, so that the parent can decide whether or not placing their child back in public schools, a public preschool, would be best in meeting their needs. There are 13 categories under federal law to qualify for special education services, and they are listed here for you. In addition, the child needs support because their disability adversely affects their educational performance, and they are in need of special education, as in specifically designed instruction. So our last topic today is our special education and the grief process. As we step into this, please keep in mind that not all cultures perceive special education as do Americans. Not all cultures see their child as broken when they are born. Not all cultures see that their child needs to be fixed. Some cultures don't even have the word disability in their languages, their native language. So please be aware of this when you approach parents. They may not only not understand what special education is about or a disability is about, so help them walk through this process. Also, different cultures process grief differently. So how you process grief, how you see disability within the educational setting could be diversely different from the families you serve. The grief process is innate to humankind, regardless of culture. However, how we move through these steps and how we respond to the different steps can be very different. So denial, anxiety, fear, guilt, depression, and anger. Denial. From the research, we can tell that oftentimes parents are perceived as in denial when maybe culturally they just don't see what we see as Americans, as educators, used to a system that diagnoses disability. So they need time to process, and they need space to grieve the loss of a dream. When all of us have conceived a child or know someone who has, we think about all the possibilities for that child in God's world and what we see as the normal, for lack of a better word, of growing up and having careers and families and opportunities. When a child is diagnosed with a disability, parents see their dreams shattered and have to regroup around what is God's purpose for their child's life. And you need to be able to give them that space while also giving them support through listening and through prayer. Parents need to have time to build their strength around this new concept that their child has a special need. They need to look for support. If you can guide them towards support groups or another family that has a child with a similar disability so that they can gain support. And again, we need to be so conscious of this cultural difference around the topic of disability. Next up is anxiety. Parents become very anxious and that they feel they need to do something. they need to fix something. And it gives them energy and a heightened sense of drive. But then at the same time, they're feeling overwhelmed with all this new information coming in. And what do they do with it? Helping parents work through the process, helping parents take a deep breath and being able to say, let's take this a step at a time and let's focus our energy on point A and let's leave point B through F alone for now. So helping them narrow their focus temporarily and focus on one item at a time is a great way to help them. Fear. What has happened? During the fear process, they begin to comprehend their child's special need. They want to find out more. They want to start to protect their child because of this brokenness that, which is part of the American culture, that their child needs to be fixed. They're not sure who they can trust. They may even question trusting you because you're the one who brought it up in the first place. They're very protective. This is my child. And they're afraid of the stigma that will come along with their child as their child moves forward into a community. Will their child stand out or be different? Parents feel guilty. What did I do to my child? Why didn't I see this earlier? Couldn't I have prevented it? And yet we need to help parents realize that our children are created in God's image, and whatever his purpose is for them, this area of special need is special to them. And for some reason, God has given it to them to use and to fulfill God's purpose. We won't know what that is, maybe for years to come, especially in young children. So help parents not feel guilty. This was God's plan for whatever reason. And our goal now is to help this child, as we do all children, to find their purpose in God's kingdom, to move them forward. And just note that guilt explains the unexplainable. If you want to watch a great movie that reflects especially this part of the grief process, my favorite one is Happy Feet and the penguin with Mumble and the guilt that his father goes through with dropping the egg and then feeling embarrassed about his son being different and the time it takes for the father to come around to understanding the beauty within Mumble. So if you have Happy Feet, take a moment to watch it. It really does capture much of this grief process for parents of children with special needs. At some point, parents do become depressed because they realize they can't fix this. They feel helpless. They punish themselves. They see their child as half empty, as we see the cup is half empty, instead of looking at all the opportunities that this child can bring in meeting the needs of God's purpose for their life. And parents feel incompetent to raise their child. So helping parents get connected with support groups, helping them understand that they're going to be supported, and finding out who their support system is beyond the school. Is their extended family supportive? You will find that depending on cultures, parents may not have familial family support because family members don't believe in a disability. So who are supporting the parents outside of the school? Parents may become angry. What is fair? What is just? They'll begin blaming that maybe this is your fault because you have been teaching the child and you didn't teach them effectively. They want you to fix it. So they're going to demand action from you to fix their child, to have their child move more quickly and get caught up with their peers. So as I've mentioned a few times, the cultural perspectives, the child is whole versus the child is broken. Sympathy for the child versus shame for the family. For some cultures, a child with disability is a shame on the family, meaning that the family has done something wrong, and so they are being punished by having a child with a disability. The emphasis that we put in American law, American culture, on the individual, that our attention needs to be on fixing the individual, versus some communities and tribes do not see the emphasis on the individual. Rather, the tribe is what's important. The family community is what is important. So if a child has a disability, they still see them as whole and still being able to contribute to the community or tribe. So keep those in mind as well. So the term lift, the spirit transforms. When you're working with families and their child is struggling, you have to learn to listen far more than talk. They need to be able to express these different levels of the grief process. If they're angry with you, you don't need to defend yourself. You just need to sit and listen and let them vent. You have to realize that the grief process is not about you. It's the loss of a dream. It's fear for the child. It's what do I do now? And so we need to help the family transform this grief into realizing that the child is God's child. And then we need to help the families transform this grief, this concern, into realizing that their child is whole in God's eyes and that the child has a purpose. We are all transformed by the Holy Spirit. So how do we help this family see that Christ is living within their child? The Holy Spirit is in their child. And how do we help them move forward? Now, with that said, this grief process and the need to lift will occur every time a child does not reach a milestone that their typical peers do. Whether that's walking, speaking, reading, getting a driver's license, being asked to the prom. These are things that children with disabilities often struggle to achieve. And the parent will go through the grief process multiple times a year. And with each process, you need to come back and remember that the Spirit transforms all of us. And it is through these steps and through prayer that we can help the family move forward. So when you meet with the family, what you can do, what do you want me to understand? How can I be more supportive? Ask questions. Give the parent space. They need time to accept reality. They need time to look at the stages of development, appropriate goals. And as I've shared, it will repeat itself again and again. Parents need support. They will find a new dream for their child if they look at the child as whole and that God has a purpose for them. And parents need time. Please give them time to process this. You need to acknowledge and respond, listen, support, empower parents. And remember, it's not about you. The role of the parent is the storyteller. They need to be able to tell their story. They're also the expert on their child. So they are also the educator, and make sure they are true partners with you during all of these processes. And they can empower you. Listen to them. I hope you've enjoyed the information. You can contact me either at the university or at Reimagining Special Education, a nonprofit a colleague and I have started. Feel free to contact me at either. I am happy to provide you with any type of information, answer questions, schedule a time to meet via phone or via Zoom. So feel free to reach out at any time. I see myself as a serving leader. And if there is anything I can do for you to grow God's kingdom, please let me know. Thank you for this time together. Take care.